Hello, everybody. Today, we are critiquing an MFA portfolio by Zainab. If you would like to grow as an artist and you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof: critiques, tutorials, and professional development. We are going to be looking at Zainab Zulfiqar, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, who is a recent graduate from the National College of Arts in Pakistan, focusing on fine arts and miniature paintings. First of all, Zainab, who, by the way, is here live with us here in the chat. So if any of you have questions for Zainab, definitely ask away. And of course, I'll be taking comments and questions during the critique. I have to say, you've got a very well-written artist statement. There's a lot in the artist statement to process, and you may find that at some point you need to write multiple artist statements. So sometimes people have a short general artist statement that just talks about all the work, and then individual statements that explain the individual bodies of work, because you have so much going on here. I think that's really exciting. But I think your artist statement has a lot. And so you may want to simplify the language a little bit, maybe cut back on what you talk about. I know that's really hard to do because your work is very involved and there's so much to talk about, which is wonderful. But from a writing point of view, you may want to make that a little bit shorter. All right, let's take a look at this first piece, which is called My House is Falling Apart, 21 by 14 inches. And the medium is gouache on Wosley. I looked it up in advance, and I guess Wosley is a type of paper that is typically used in miniature painting. Zainab, maybe you can clarify exactly what Wosley is like, and if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and why you chose to use it, because I've never seen that material before, which is why I looked it up in advance. Zainab says, yes, this is my 6th draft of the artist statement. I'm still working on it so I can apply this year. It's really hard to write about your work. I mean, I always think it's funny that they want artists to write about our work because there is a reason we're making art and not writers. But I think you're doing very well. You just need to simplify it a little bit. All right. I think what I really like about your work in general, there's an ethereal quality and a mood to a lot of these pieces. Now, stylistically speaking, some of them are similar, but there's others that are really quite different, as we'll see later in the portfolio. But I think in terms of layers and really playing with different levels of opacity and translucency, your work is subtle. It's not work that slaps you in the face. It's work that I think really invites a more thoughtful, slower contemplation. In my opinion, we need more of that in the world. Everything is so fast-paced. I was just scrolling through TikTok and I was horrified that I was giving a lot of videos literally 1 second to decide if I wanted to keep watching. And so I think work like this becomes increasingly more rare. And when you find it, it really feels precious and special. And I think that makes sense given the depth of the personal narratives that you're talking about here. And I think it's a good choice for most of your work to be monochromatic, because I think that you're using color in different ways. Like this one has a little bit more of a green tint to it. This one's more purpley, more bluish. But I think the fact that each one is fairly monochromatic actually does make the work pretty cohesive. So I'm probably not the best person to ask. I mean, if Lauren was on the stream, she would probably be able to give a different point of view. I'm a sucker for things that are monochromatic, so you may want to take my comment with a little bit of a grain of salt. Zainab, who is the artist, says, Wosley is basically made manually in our university classes where you have different watercolor sheets pressed together. And Zainab explains, copper sulfate is put in between so the paper isn't eaten by different things. And I use Wosley because I make work that uses a lot of layering, because I really like making work that takes time, that can represent time and fragmented memory. I think that's absolutely wonderful. You may want to consider having some close-ups, like really, really close-up shots, because the Wasley, I'm not familiar with that. It's not a very common surface. And so you may want to show some images where that's a little bit more apparent, because we can't really see it very well in the photo. I think my first thought about this piece, I really like the layering of the blue on top of the cut paper, but I think that the shape of the house that you've chosen is very generic. I think it's that typical rectangular house with a rectangle on top. And I want to hear more about your culture, because so much of your artist statement is about, as we said in the statement, a queer artist living in a third world country, or being queer non-binary can result in a very isolating experience. Tell us about your country. Tell us what that architecture is like, because the types of houses that people grow up in, I'm convinced really have an impact in terms of how people grow up. I mean, I just moved very recently to Utah, and our house is so different. And I noticed it took me a long time to feel physically comfortable. I mean, I'm just starting to feel that way. And so I think that you want to get more specific there, because your statement's so specific. You're not saying I'm queer. You're saying I'm queer and non-binary, and I live in a third world country. So all those layers of your personal narrative, I think, really need to come across more. And so since the cutout of this house really holds together all of those ethereal images, that house is pretty important. So I would rethink how you do that. And you may want to explore other ways of cutting out the shape. I'm guessing this is laser cut. It looks like it is. Maybe something that's hand cut would feel a little bit more intimate. This does have a somewhat sterile quality to it. Maybe that's intentional. I'm not totally sure, but those are some things to think about. Tara is asking, what will graduates learn from an MFA? So an MFA portfolio is when you're applying for a Master's of Fine Arts degree, and an MFA is a terminal degree in studio arts. There's no PhD or anything like that. And usually it's your bridge into the professional world. It's very different than, say, a BFA, where it's more about gaining a lot of skills and getting more diverse experiences. MFA is very focused. MFA is really about creating a cohesive body of work that really digs deep into content and engaging with your work critically. It's not a lot about technique. They really don't teach a lot of technique at most MFA programs. Okay, let's take a look at the self-portrait ink, marker clay, foam embroidery on canvas. Wow, there's a lot happening here. Okay, let me break down some of the materials, because I just love the embroidery. I'm guessing it's some of those little flowers down there at the bottom. It also seems like there are some areas where the texture is very apparent. Like if I come here, this person, you can really see the fabric. And I guess that's what I want more of. I want the fabric to be more prominent, because I can see the washes and those are beautiful. But there are some really sensitive areas, like this scratching, these like flower-like forms here that are so subtle, but I almost lose them. So you might want to make that a little bit more prominent. And I would also think about the text. So you have text throughout the composition. It's here, here, and here. And the thing to note about text is you want to make a decision. Do I want people to be able to read this text? Right now, I can't really read it. I'm pulling out a couple of words here and there, but not very many. And that's almost more frustrating than if we just can't read it, period. Because I think you can do it in such a way that you suggest the presence of text, but you make it illegible. So people just give up right away. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like people just say, okay, I know there's text, but I'm not gonna bother to try to read it. I think the awkward thing is when people can almost read it. Like they get a couple of words, but then they're frustrated that they can't read more or have text that you really can read. That's what's very tricky about it. I think there's an awkward stage. Zainab says, very complicated to type out. There's so much I want to talk about, especially the culture where my work is coming from individually. What you may want to think about, Zainab, is maybe zeroing in on one very specific part of your personal narrative. And it can be something very simple. Let's just say, for example, we just looked at this image of a house. You just could say, okay, everything in my body of work revolves around this house or around architecture, because you are trying to tackle a lot of things. And I admire that. I think that's extremely ambitious. I would rather somebody try to do too much rather than not give me enough to chew on. So you're in a very good position in that you need to step back a little bit and say, if I were to boil this down to something, what could this possibly be? Because your technique is really, really interesting. I do think in this one, the composition's a little bit centered. I don't find a very compelling reason to travel into the corners or the edges. Everything's very much enclosed. So you may want to find a way to distribute things a little bit better, because I think the oval in the middle with the figure, I go right to that because it's the darkest, most prominent section of the composition. So if you have that, say, in the lower left-hand corner, that throws us off a little bit more. It's a little bit less predictable. Adam has a question. I'm curious about the Wasley. Could you cut the paper into the desired shape on the front end of the process before it's hard to cut? Because Zainab explained earlier, yes, it's laser cut. You can't cut Wasley by hand. It's very difficult to do that. And Zainab explains, when I first started my work, I was reading The Myth of Sisyphus. I think that was the dude that had to push up the rock, if I'm correct. The absurdity and the mundanity, which is where everything started from, want to incorporate my personal history into that. The work I sent started 2 years ago. As you go forward, it changes. I think it is much more specific now than it was then. Yeah, and sometimes it takes time for work to get there. We had a stream yesterday where we talked about, does your art need to have meaning? And one of the things we talked about is that a lot of this stuff takes time to whittle it down. And so oftentimes starting by trying to do everything gets you to eventually narrow your focus a little bit more. I'm really interested in these faces, Zainab, because there's one up here, there's one over here, there's this figure that's rolled over a little bit. And I know the faces become more prominent towards the end of the portfolio. But here, I wonder if you need them, because I actually find this figure up here, which feels like it's tumbling in a way, more dynamic and a lot more mysterious. Because you talk in your statement about generational trauma, nuclear heteronormative system. So a lot of this, as you say in the statement, are ritualistic flashbacks. So there is this theme of memory and things from the past. And I think the thing about the past is that for a lot of people, it can be anywhere from just crystal clear to a totally vague memory to something that maybe your parents told you you did, and you're like, I don't remember that at all. And so I would think about, how much do I want to reveal? Because the faces in some ways spoil it for me a little bit. And they're so tiny that they're a little bit hard to read. I like the faces more in the later part of the portfolio, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But there's something about that figure in the upper left-hand corner. Has a wonderful sense of movement. I don't know what these little white things, they almost look like grains of rice that are tumbling down. I think that that is really great. And I'd also just think about scale, because all four of these patches in the composition, they're all the same size. So think about this. If you had one, excuse me, frog in my throat, that was very dominant. Let's say the one in the upper left-hand corner is really gigantic. And then some of these other ones are smaller, maybe one's medium size. I think what you're doing there, you'll be able to create a hierarchy of these images. Right now, they're all equal. They don't really have a very distinct dynamic or relationship. So individually, I like the sections of the piece. But the thing is, you can't just think about the pieces. You have to think about how do they relate to each other. Is one more dominant? Is one a lot smaller? That's actually more important than the individual images themselves. Canvasky says, I would love to know if MFA portfolio must have all works on a single theme or can have different themes in different mediums. There's no hard, fast rule, but in general, they do want to see something pretty focused. So if you have multiple themes, I would have them be somewhat related. Like, I don't think you should have images of unicorns combined with images about family trauma. Like, I don't think that's going to work out very well. They should be somewhat related. I think medium-wise, just in the same category. I don't think they want a smorgasbord of a little here, a little there. I think they want to see something fairly related. You can see that is the case in Zainab's portfolio, that there is some variety, but you can see the ink is pretty present. So is the Wasley. And the images, while distinctively different, definitely feel like they relate to each other. Okay, this one's pretty different. It's called Daily Grind. It's fairly small. And again, there's a lot getting lost in that border. And I'm looking at it very closely, and it's beautiful. Like, I don't know if you guys can see, but there's this floating piece of clothing that I think is just very haunting. Even things like the TV set down here at the bottom is so dated. Like, that's a very particular type of TV set from when I was growing up. I mean, remember when TVs had knobs on them and they had round screens? Like, that's actually a wonderful moment that you included, Zainab, because it says something about the time period that you grew up in. And I just find the clothing up here so haunting. I mean, there's something about the way it's almost floating across the surface that I really enjoy a lot. But I think visually, a lot of that gets lost because when I look at the composition, what I really see is the image in the middle. I see the very bold washes. I see that white figure that's in the middle, when actually a lot of the stuff that I think is very captivating is in the border. So I think you want to ask yourself, when you look at your pieces, what is the priority here? What is the part of the piece that really tells my story? Because the middle part is so ambiguous that even though it has a very dark mood and it evokes a certain amount of emotion, it doesn't communicate nearly as much as what's happening in the border. Okay, I love this piece. I think this is gorgeous. And I love that you are playing with a different shape. Tell me in the chat, who here has experimented with different shapes in your artwork other than the conventional rectangle, which is what people typically use when they're doing 2D artwork. And I think you could think about different types of shapes. Zainab, I don't know if there's a particular reason you chose this shape, but I think shapes can have a lot to say. Sometimes they are trying to allude to architecture. For example, if you had this as an arch, we would read it very differently. If it was a scroll, that would also be different. And so I think you could definitely play that a lot more. So Zainab says the border, which let me go back to that original image. The border was inspired by Persian miniature, which usually shows kings and queens doing their daily tasks. So I want to recontextualize the narrative. See, that's brilliant. I love that. It's so wonderful that you're taking your personal experience and you're linking it to a history of Persian miniatures and making a more contemporary take on that. That's wonderful. It's just that the border is getting lost. And so you might even want to reverse it. Like, let's say that middle picture is almost empty. Maybe it's just white. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. But something that points us to the border, I think would be a lot more interesting. Hannah Cecil says, I use pretty much only circles for shapes a couple years ago. It's gotten scarier as I've developed as an artist, though, for some reason. Well, circles also have something very specific. I mean, think about how different a circle is interpreted versus an ellipse. People see it very differently. And Zainab says, with this space, I wanted to add perspective. When you look at it in real life, it is bigger at the bottom and slimmer at the top. Oh, see, that bums me out that I can't see it in real life, because that's something which I probably can't see very clearly in the photograph. And Lunaire says that oval piece is so beautiful. I love trying different shapes and different mediums. It's so much fun. And Jane says, I recently painted a cicada wing on a wooden palette. The oval shape worked very well. We just had historic 17-year periodical cicadas. Very cool. So yeah, if you haven't thought about that, everybody in the chat, consider it. It can be a really fun thing to play with. The atmosphere is incredible here. I feel like I can breathe the air in this painting. And actually, I don't know if you've seen this film. It's called, I think it's Song of the Sea. I just watched it a couple weeks ago. I'm going to put it in the chat. Song of the Sea. And it's by this animation studio in Ireland. And actually, the way that you've drawn these very graphic, simplified mountains at the bottom reminds me a lot of that, because that film, oh my God, it's like they painted every rock as an individual. And that's what I'm seeing here. I love the bottom section. The upper section, I think, is also fascinating. I think it almost feels like these ghosts, and then these lines that come down connect them to that bottom space. I don't think the house and the far right, as everybody see this, is right here. It's this little tiny house. Again, it's an architecture thing. Like, it's such a stereotypical Monopoly game house. And again, I think that you need to have architecture that's more specific, or get rid of it altogether, because I do find that that house, it feels like it doesn't belong there. It feels like it should be something else. Zainab says this piece took 6 months of layering. It's a lot of fun because the Wassley sucks the ink inside the paper. You can layer it easily. It really worked for you, Zainab. The layering is gorgeous. And does everybody see there's a little tint of maroon on the bottom? And that is such a great way to sneak in just a little bit of color. So there's a bit of a warmth to the piece. It's not so cold as if it were black and white. So I think it's a brilliant solution in terms of color. Oh, thank you, Zet. Cartoon Saloon. That's the animation studio that produced Song of the Sea. Yes, Jill, it's the one with the Selkies. Check it out. It's a beautiful film. I was so impressed by the backgrounds. So Zainab, I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Mazur, but I think you should really look at his series of prints based on Dante's Inferno, because he does remarkable things with layering and mark making. His work is very dark and very atmospheric. I don't know if you've done printmaking before, but even if you don't do printmaking, it's really worth it to see the way that he organizes a lot of the atmosphere, because his work is also interesting. It teeters between representation and abstraction. There's some areas where you feel like a figure starting to emerge. Other times it just immerses into the darkness. So look up his stuff. And I would also recommend, you might want to try this just as an exercise. I'm not saying for finished work, but if you've never done wet charcoal before, this is an amazing technique that can really loosen you up. It's great for atmosphere and marks. Might just give you some ideas. I think that you definitely have something going with the ink and the gouache and the gel pens and the Wassley paper. So I think you should stick with that, but this might be a good exercise for you to play with. Zainab says, wow, this is so good. I love it. I had a fracture, couldn't do printmaking. I'm a university for 4 months, so I'm not very skilled at it, which is why I really want to apply for an MFA. Well, Zainab, there are other printmaking techniques that you can easily do at home. For example, you can do jelly plates, and we have a couple streams that demonstrate jelly plates and transfers. So take a look at some of those tutorials. We do have a playlist on printmaking, so you can check that out on YouTube. Okay, this one's called Memoryscape. It's pencil on paper. I think this is not as strong as some of the other pieces. It does have beautiful technique, but I just find that this glaring white space, I either want you to fill it in or I want you to make it more sparse. So a wonderful artist for you to look at in terms of sparse, minimal images. There's actually two artists. So the first one is Silke Schatz, and I'm going to put these names into the chat. And the second one is Toba Kadori. And if you look at Toba Kadori's work, there's almost nothing on the page. I mean, it almost feels like there's just this whisper of marks. And I think here I see you struggling a little bit because it's getting very, very picky and so detail oriented that I find myself getting sucked into that. And then the other parts just feel empty. Now, the parts I do like, I love the bottom. And that's sort of similar to the oval piece where you had these very round forms. They're somewhat suggestive of mountains, but they're also super stylized. So I've never tried to read them as real mountains, which I like. So for example, this lower left-hand corner, like here, I think that's a beautiful balance because there's a shape, it's a fairly empty shape, but it's also pretty bold and large. Whereas in the upper left-hand corner, the upper right-hand corner, I feel like those areas, they're so fussy that I find myself a little bit overwhelmed by that. I like the cleanliness of the bottom landscape a lot more. Zainab says, it isn't white. In real life, it has a wallpaper drawn on it. I think I should have sent some close-ups. Oh, all right. So maybe I'm just totally confused by the photograph. I'm sorry about that. But either way, I think that you may want to reconsider the detail work because I'm not sure you need that much. I think that you could cut back and be fine. Okay, so now I think you can see there's starting to be a shift in the work. This is called generational soars. And I think everybody here, you can see that number one, the images are more graphic and the edges are harder and more defined. Like for example, the fish, I think that's a cat, doesn't matter. I mean, it's a creature. And then also this body is very interesting to me because it feels human. But then you get down to those claws and there's something off about it. It's somewhat uncomfortable, but I think that's good. I like that it's this undefined figure. And I think what you're talking about in terms of identity, that makes sense to me. I think that that's really well done. I don't like the face. Here's the thing. Like a lot of people really cling to faces to express, especially emotion or trying to tell a story. But Zainab, it may be worth you trying to make images without faces because I find your most compelling imagery is not faces. I think that the animals at the bottom, the figure is really well done. And in all the pieces we've seen so far, the face has been problematic. And so you may want to just cut it out altogether. Or you might think about changing the style or the representation of it. Tell me in the chat, who here likes the faces that we've seen so far? Who thinks we could live without them? And who here thinks, you know what, we just need to shift it up a little bit. Maybe it's the placement, maybe it's the style, the way it's drawn. Let me know. By the way, I want to give a shout out to RB Dick. Thank you so much for the super sticker. Every single contribution that any of you can make to Art Prof is really important in terms of keeping us free, up and running, and accessible to everybody. Zainab says, this piece, Generational Soars, was made after graduation because I had the freedom to make my cartoons as my teacher's teacher said. I wonder, Zainab, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the comment correctly, but did you feel that you couldn't make cartoons in school and maybe graduating gave you that liberty? Because I've talked to a lot of people about how sometimes in art school, they're embarrassed to make stuff that's humorous, that maybe has a cartoony look to it because they're worried it's not taken seriously enough. But I happen to really like these a lot. And actually another artist that you might want to look at, and she's my former student, Juhee Yoon. Her work is really different than yours. She does a lot of printmaking, a lot of layering, and her work is mostly editorial illustration. But she has done some other publications as well. But look at her work because she does a lot of really cool things with bold graphic shapes and also layering of colors because all her work is printmaking. So definitely check that out. And we have a comment here from Adam who says, I love how the colors pop all happy, but upon closer inspection, it's a little creepy. Makes me want to sit with this for a bit and investigate. Yeah, I think that some people might assume, oh, well, if the image is going to be fairly simplified and graphic, it's got to be fun. No, it's not fun. I mean, there's something about that fish at the bottom, pretty menacing, and I'm very, very interested in that. Mr. Ugelbog says, I like the face. I feel like it balances out the window and brings more bright colors to the right side. Slepnir says, if you keep doing faces, it needs to incorporate with your other style. The faces don't seem to mesh. And Zainab says, my work was always illustrative. However, when I was working, my department specifically was very rigid in what is skill and what isn't. Well, screw that. Make the work you want to make. Like that's not their business, in my opinion. This, I think, is really interesting. This face I like. I think this face, it fits the stylization. The fact that it's upside down is really playing to your advantage, because unlike some of the prior pieces, I don't recognize the face right away. The face is really integrated into the figure. I mean, what I see first actually is the spiral motion, the hair swirling around. And so here the face is a piece of the figure. It's not this sore thumb in the context of everything else. I'm not sure I understand what's happening with the shape in the center. I see there's a little bit of writing in there, but I wonder if one of the reasons why I'm feeling that way is because that shape isolates the blue. Like there's no blue anywhere else in the piece. I mean, there's a little bit of a hint around it, but I almost think you could do more of that, because if I go up here, does everybody see there's a little hint of blue here, a little bit here? Oh, I'm seeing more of it. Actually, now that I'm looking closer, there's more blue than I thought, but I would love to see more blue. I'd love to see the blue spread more dramatically, because I love these sections where it comes out. It's just, for me, I want more of it. I'm craving something to be a little bit more prominent. Lunaire says, I think faces often feel a bit too on the nose. When it comes to wanting to bring across emotions, and art without them, to me, often feels more impactful. Yeah, I think for a lot of people, sometimes the face is just the first impulse, because we have faces. We're going to be thinking about that as a form of expression. And so sometimes the challenge of saying, hey, can I do this without the face, is really good. Victor says, I like her work, but composition is something I suggest she focuses on more. Well, it varies, because I think this piece is a very strong composition. I think the blue could be better. But if I go through and I look at some of these other ones, so let's go through, like, I think some of your strongest composition, I think this one's great. I think that this one could use more. This one I think is a little bit boxy. It seems like little pieces thrown together. I think this one's very good in terms of composition. So it fluctuates. I think that some of it's working, but yeah, definitely think about that more. And Zainab says, the red piece with the blue in the middle, which is this one, has some blue washes. For me, I wanted to use the same blue in the house that you saw in the start. Yeah, I might just get that to spread more. And I like the body. I mean, the body is strange and awkward. It feels like it doesn't fit. I mean, look at I guess their feet, lower left-hand corner. And I know for you, a lot of this is about feeling uncomfortable in your space, because if I go back to the artist statement, Zainab explains the theme, one of the themes is coping with the invasions of safe spaces, negative nostalgia, making an individual live in a nuclear heteronormative system, completely isolated. And we see some of that in here with the figure being so awkwardly defined. I mean, it seems very intentional, in my opinion. Simon says, I kind of love this. Feels like some sort of dream. Rucknowart says, Munch vibe. Ooh, Munch. Sorry, I thought you said Munch. Munch, I'm assuming Edvard Munch. Vibe meets an exorcism. I love it. Great. All right, let's take a look at this one. I really like this piece. This piece combines the figurative elements, the graphic shapes, but also that beautiful layering and atmosphere that we saw in the oval shape piece. It's got an incredible background. I love the background. The background has just so much depth. and complexity, and yet it does not take away from the figure. The figure is still very prominent. The figure has a lot of physical weight to it. And so this is a great balance of background and figure. And that is hard to do. A lot of people have trouble getting the figure to sit inside a space. And yet the figure also feels like it's part of the space. It doesn't seem totally separate. And then even at the very, very bottom, these like little grains of rice in a way. I don't know if that's actually what they are. But that, the fish that are flowing through, I mean, it's like everything is interconnected. I mean, it almost feels like it could be somewhat like an underwater scene where things just are continually moving. I don't know about those little stars. Does everybody see this? There's one up here, here, and here. I guess it's like that emoji star that you see is just a little bit generic, and everything else about this piece is not generic. And so for me, the stars don't really fit. Wonderful face. I love this face. The teeth are so uncomfortable. I mean, they look like they hurt. The flow of the hair, and I love the color in this piece. This is probably my favorite piece in terms of color because it feels monochromatic, but there's a lot of color in this piece. And so I don't know if this is a color scheme that you want to continue working with, but I think there's just a rich lusciousness to this that I think is just wonderful. Slapnir says, yes, this has a bit of a nightmare to it. I like it. Ooglebog says, again, with the chilling toes and fingers. Zainab says, in the piece you saw in the start has a year worth of writing on it, which is why I wanted to add text in the red one too. My thesis exhibit, they were presented together. Great. And Zainab says, Into the Woods, I'm guessing you're talking about the musical. Maybe it was a book. I can't remember. It is a musical. Honestly, freaked me out. I was very anxious at the time. Oh, you can tell. the emotion is very, very present and an amazing background. Even if I don't know that it's inspired by Into the Woods, you definitely feel that apprehension about that background. Yeah, Jane says, like the Brothers Grimm, but not the Brothers Grimm. You know, it's like, it's got a similar tone to it, but this very much feels like Zainab's personal narrative. Oh, I'm sorry, Zainab. Into the Woods is the name of the painting. Okay, you might want to watch that because I immediately thought Into the Woods, the musical. So you might want to change it to something else. Sorry, my fault. So Zainab, I think you should take a look at Lane Smith. Lane Smith is a children's book illustrator, and I know that's not the direction you're going in. I know you're more invested in fine arts, but he has a similar dark tone. I think his work is a lot quirkier, a lot more humorous and whimsical. But I think a lot of you can see there are some stylistic overlaps in that a lot of these pieces are fairly monochromatic. He has graphic shapes, but he also has a lot of shading and a lot of gradients. So take a look at his work. All right, so we have this piece. It's called The Welcome Mat. And here's that figure again. I think this is a wonderful figure, and it just seems like there's so many places it could go. I wish the hair was a little bit more prominent because I see it coming out of the head, but because it's so dramatically cropped, I actually didn't realize until I looked at it more closely that it kept going. So you might want to zoom out just a little bit more. And then I also think you should think about the hair intertwining with the body, because it just seems convenient that the hair never touches the body. I mean, what if the hair is enwrapped around the body? What if it crosses over the body? I mean, it could be just this almost Celtic knot of forms that I think could be so wonderful. And I love the hands and feet. The hands and feet, they almost immerse into that blue. I hadn't seen that in some of the other pieces where they were more graphic. And so here, the graphic shape is very, very clear. But at the same time, it also digs deeper into that section. And I like the star in the lower left-hand corner. I think that's much better than the other stars that you have. And we also have a comment from Zainab who says, miniature is super illustrative also. Let me add a link to show. I'm not super familiar with Persian miniatures, but I have seen some of them, and a lot of them are very narrative. And so even if you don't want to be a children's book illustrator, I think it would be worth looking at some illustration pieces, maybe just stylistically, but also how they tell those narratives. So I think that would be great. And there's something upsetting about those flowers, because they're those typical woo flowers. They're supposed to be so cute and fun, and they're not cute and fun here, which I think is great. I think they're actually a little bit menacing, which is really good, I think, given the themes that you're working with. Margaret says this is such brave distortion of the figure, at least to Western eyes. And Zoe says, I love Into the Woods. It's the piece we were seeing earlier. So much to appreciate within. I could look at it, interpret it for hours. I want to see a whole creepy, beautiful book of your work. I mean, Zainab, you have very diverse ways of working. We've seen stylistically that you have a huge range. I tend to like your more graphic pieces more, although the oval one, which had the atmosphere, I thought was phenomenal. So maybe it's about combining them. Maybe it's about pursuing them as two separate bodies of work, which I think would be totally fine as well. We do have many other MFA portfolio critiques that you can check out on our YouTube channel. And don't miss, we have a special live stream tonight, 11:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are celebrating our 100K milestone here on YouTube. And please visit the new artprof.org, completely revamped, shiny, and new. Art Prof as a podcast is available on Spotify and also on iTunes. And I am doing a stage session today. So in a few minutes, I will be over in the Art Prof Discord, and a stage session is where you can all talk to me on voice. So Zainab, I don't know if you're available, if you're even in the Discord, but if you want to join me there, we can chat a little bit on voice. And anybody here who wants to join us, you're welcome to listen. You can also get on voice and ask me questions. It doesn't have to be related to this portfolio stream, but we will also be in post live stream. So if you want to ask me a question by typing, you can do that too, but they're really fun. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, leave a comment, help us with those YouTube gods. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters. We are very excited that we filled up 2 slides, and we want to get that 3rd slide going. So think about it, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much, Zainab, for sharing your work with us. I'll see you next time. Bye.